All right, let's wait for the recording. It is recording. Hi, how's everyone?
Good.
Good. Who else there?
Me, Francine,
Okay, I've got Francine,
Mariah, Catherine,
Mariah, and Catherine. I can actually see
Logan.
Logan, and Nobi is online.
Grace just walked in.
Grace,
Josh is here.
Josh. Okay, so Francine, Mariah, Catherine, Logan, Grace, Josh, and Nobi's online.
Yep.
All right, let me know if somebody else comes in. Who'd like to open in prayer?
I can.
Okay.
Okay. Your Heavenly Father, thank you for this time that we can come together and we can study and just want to have a desire to get better in this area in our life. I pray for our time as we finish this cycle. We're halfway through, that we would get excellence and be diligent in our studies. In your name we pray. Amen.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's see. I haven't had a chance to read your essays, but I'm sure they're great. Let's see, everybody has their interview in. I haven't finished correcting those, grading those yet, but they're coming. Should have that all done by this weekend. Your next, some of you have already handed in your collaborative music selection project. And that is, of course, due on the 16th. So if you're up on that, that's great. Let me get my other glasses. And then the one after that is your collaborative administrative project plan. Again, this is a music department or a church or a school or other ministry, and you're working collaboratively together to put together an administrative project, a plan for the whole year. So that's coming up. And then on 9/30, September 30 is your paper, your worship and philosophy paper. And then on October 7th, your research project and oral report. Any questions or comments at this point? Okay. Let's keep going with our discussion. All right. Last we left off with, we were talking about personality types. And I want to talk a little more about personality types as we go into our next topics here. There are, what we examined were 4 personality types. And to recap, they were choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholic. And choleric, the main traits of choleric are drive to control, dominance, or decisiveness. Okay, so a typical choleric is the person, it's that person you say, you always think you're right. Okay, that tends to be the choleric. Have you ever known anyone like that? Okay, Grace says yes, she does. So drive to control and dominance and decisiveness. A sanguine is, and the choleric is also called a driver, a person who drives things. So, or drives organizations, person who drives, maybe a person in a family who's a driver. And there are about 1 in 10 people are choleric. Now we have some cholerics in the class. Who are the cholerics?
Grace?
According to the test that I took, I'm equally choleric as I am melancholic.
Okay. And then there are mixes, and most of us are a mix of one or two or three of these. And so you can be a choleric melancholy or a choleric with melancholy tendencies. You can also be a melancholy with choleric tendencies. If you talk to my wife, I took one of these tests once, and I scored absolutely the same on 3 different personality types. So and my wife would say that I'm choleric. I don't think I'm choleric at all. I think I'm melancholy. But my wife would say I'm choleric, and so there are your primary traits, secondary traits, and then there are the ways you see yourself and the way others see yourself. Okay, sanguine, outgoing and sociable, interested in people, influencing and persuasive. And the sanguine is also called the persuader. So, when we look at sanguines, they're 19% or 20% of the population. So 10% of the population is choleric. About 20% is sanguine. Sanguines are the uber friendly guys. I mentioned my son Josh. If you open up a dictionary and see the word sanguine, it's got a picture of Josh's smiling face next to the word. That's how you define sanguine. Phlegmatic, steadiness, stability, patience, and says rate of motion. What that means is that just the idea that typical phlegmatic just plods along. So a typical phlegmatic would be Glenn Williams. He is phlegmatic. Again, almost perfect textbook definition. Phlegmatic with definite melancholy tendencies. I think that's why he likes musicians. I think he likes everybody, but I think that's why he likes musicians so much. 50% of the population is phlegmatic. 50%. Half of your volunteers in the church are phlegmatics. Steadiness, stability, patience, rate of motion. And finally is melancholy. And melancholy is conventional or compliance to structure, tradition, and rules. The melancholy is precise, perfectionist. They're analytical. That's a typical melancholy. And they also have a tendency to be, well, my wife was in New Mexico for 3 weeks. She came home last week. She was in New Mexico for 3 weeks and visiting her dad, who just turned 100. And so I was stuck in the house by myself and was looking for something to do. So what kinds of things do? I went to the pantry. I pulled out all the expired packages. I put everything else in order. One time she was gone, I took all the spices out of the pantry and alphabetized them, okay? Thinking that they should be alphabetized because that's how I look at the world. Now, I thought it was a perfectly natural thing to do. I came back and told my wife, and she thought I was nuts. So that's a melancholy kind of way to think. But a melancholy can also be temperamental, emotional, and everything you think of when you think of melancholy, that all comes under that same category. And 20% of the population, 1 in 5 people, are melancholy. How many melancholies do we have in the room?
What?
How many melancholies do we have in our
How many melancholies? How many of you came out as melancholy, or other people thought you were melancholy?
I thought Mariah and Francine were.
That's because we aren't.
Yeah.
I think some people said Mariah and Francine specifically.
Right. Okay, but you're going to find in a typical class, in a typical music class, somewhere between 60 and 80% of the students will be melancholy. Okay, and that's because music and art are attractive to melancholy. It draws melancholy in. Okay, so I'm mentioning that because it's important to know as we continue our conversation. We're going to talk more about that. Okay, so and then I got to this point and I tried to get through it quickly, and I don't think I did it service. So I'm gonna try it again. If you are a melancholy, other melancholies are going to get along with you. You're compatible with other melancholies because you see the world the same way. If you are a melancholy, the phlegmatic personality is going to view you as being conservative or a bean counter, an analyzer. The friendly person is going to see you, if Josh talks to you in your melancholy, he will tend to see you as rigid, impersonal, boring, stiff, and lackluster. Now, I can't speak for Josh. I'm just telling you, this is what a typical sanguine person would see. If you are melancholy, a typical choleric will see you as old ladyish, overcautious, and too picky. Picky is the word.
I don't know how I feel about this.
All right. Now, if you happen to be choleric, the melancholy, okay, so the melancholies in the room are going to look at the cholerics as though they are bossy, careless, and are acting like politicians. The phlegmatics see the choleric as dangerous, a dictator, willing to do anything they want to get what they want, and trying to beat the system. A sanguine will view the choleric as a wheeler-dealer, ruthless, more interested in money than people, and selfish. Other cholerics will see the choleric as compatible, but I guarantee you, you'll be in competition with them, because that's a typical choleric. If you are a sanguine, the melancholies see you as, now, I'm a melancholy, and my son Josh is a sanguine. A typical melancholy sees a typical sanguine as immature, childlike, disorganized, superficial, and impulsive. But don't tell Josh. Okay? A phlegmatic sees the sanguine as erratic, overreactive, and manipulative. A choleric sees a sanguine as a prima donna, a talker, a time waster, and a crybaby. Now, these are not Christian terms, by the way. I'm just talking about generally in the world. If you are phlegmatic, was anybody in the room phlegmatic?
I think Josh
I
might be.
thought I was.
I think Josh might be phlegmatic.
I think Josh is phlegmatic. Okay.
So I keep on looking.
Yeah, you keep on looking at me. I'm like, so.
I feel like, Logan, I feel like you're melancholic just because of the old lady thing.
Lisa, man.
If you are phlegmatic, the melancholy sees you as disorganized, undisciplined, too philosophical, and spacey. The other phlegmatics see you as compatible. The sanguine views you as fascinating, a super brain, and you talk to yourself. A choleric that driver personality, sees the phlegmatic as slow-moving, nuts, out of touch, or that one of them liberal arts types. Okay? So, there's a lot more information about this stuff, and you can look into it if you want to. The point is this, as I said before, you are not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. None of you, now, I'm not saying that that doesn't mean at some point in your life you may not need marriage counseling. When we had our first child, my oldest daughter's name is Rebecca. And Rebecca is choleric. Rebecca is as choleric as Josh is sanguine. She is a pure, 100% unapologetic, unadulterated choleric. She has a mom who is 100% melancholy, and she has a dad that's kind of a mix of things, mostly melancholy. Rebecca was born screaming and thrashing into the world. I have a picture of Rebecca at 5 minutes old. She is standing on her tippy toes, grabbing my finger and screaming. She had arched her back and stiffened up, and at the age of 5 minutes, she was standing on her tippy toes, arching her back, holding onto my fingers, and screaming at the top of her lungs. A typical kid walks around a year, little toddler. Rebecca started walking at 8.5 months because that's what she needed to do. Okay. So Rebecca looks at the world. If something blows up, it's somebody else caused it. Okay. Now she knows this. I'm not giving away any secrets. But imagine having melancholy, two melancholy parents having a choleric child. Now, Rebecca, one of Rebecca's interesting traits as a baby was that she wouldn't sleep. She wouldn't sleep through the night. She wouldn't nurse. She wouldn't do anything she didn't want to do, and basically she didn't want to do anything. So my wife was getting, at one point, about an hour and a half of sleep. I was looking forward every morning to leaving the house and going to work. And about 4 or 5 months into it, we were at wit's end. This is our first child, and we had to go into counseling. Had we not gone into counseling, the marriage and the babyhood would not have survived. We were at wit's end. In the course of the counseling, we learned how to handle this little 4-pound bundle of energy. And we worked within our temperaments and her temperament to bring her under control and finally get her to start nursing and sleeping and doing the things she needed to do as a baby. But we couldn't do that without counseling, because we were just dumb, stupid parents. I know I said before I'm the smartest guy in the room. I was joking. Okay, most of you are smarter than I am. Now, you may not know as much as I know about music yet. One day you'll know a lot more than I do. But I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I'm actually usually the dumbest guy in the room. So I'm just telling you that I'm not saying that at some point in your life you may not need counseling, because you very well may need counseling. And you may need somebody to go talk to and bounce things off of. So that's not, but I'm not talking about broken. I'm not talking about somebody who's psychotic or neurotic. You all are normal. You're normal people. You have normal personalities, but you are artists. And artists see the world differently than the rest of humanity. And we're going to talk more about that. But if nothing else, as we've talked about personality types here, take away this thought. We are not all the same. We're not all wired the same. You will appear certain ways to other people that you would be shocked to know that they're thinking that way of you. And you're going to be looking at other people and sizing them up. And the way you're thinking about them would shock them if they knew what you thought of them. We need to get outside of ourselves, beyond ourselves, allow people to be human beings, allow people to act engage God's creation in the way they've been hardwired. And I'm not telling you that you have to put up with boorish or bad behavior. That's not the same thing. I'm talking about personality. You can be choleric and still be a great person to have on a ministry team. I don't know that you want a lot of cholerics on a team, but one or two cholerics is really helpful. And and I've already told you this. When I hired Teresa Purinton to be the secretary for the music department, I hired her specifically because she's choleric. That's the reason I hired her. And I knew that she would be able to fill in the spots that I didn't have. My weaknesses were her strengths. And so I brought her in specifically to do a very specific job. Some people would call that good cop, bad cop, and that was certainly part of it. But it was also her intense way of driving and organizing things. And she had some melancholy in her. And we worked really well together. I'm melancholy with a bit of choleric, and she's choleric with a bit of melancholy. So it worked really well. We understood each other. My wife is melancholy, and so though my wife would say that I come across too often as sounding like I know everything, which is just horrifying to me that I would come across that way. Maybe it's the teacher side of things, but my wife and I watch the news, or we watch a movie, or we go for a walk, or we have a talk, and it's amazing how we think alike. Not just think alike, it's how we look at the world. We see the world and we see people through the same sorts of sets of eyes. She's much friendlier than I am. She's got sanguine in her that I don't have. But other than that, we're highly compatible. So this is about how we relate to each other. The vast majority of people are not broken human beings. We're just different. I'm having this conversation with you because the world will tell you that you're supposed to be a certain way. And if you aren't a certain way, then then they put a label on you. You're either this label or this label or this label. And then you need to go get fixed because you're not normal. And I'm telling you, you are normal. And that God has wired you a very specific way to do a very specific job. And once you understand that and you embrace it, then you don't have to be afraid of it or worry about it anymore. And you get to stop thinking that there's something wrong with you. Now, I'm not telling you that people won't say there's something wrong with you. Actually, people will. People will tell you that you are a certain way and that you shouldn't be. The gentleman that discipled me, his name is Joel. I was a young man. He was about 1.5 years older than me. Joel was an engineer. He was phlegmatic, absolutely phlegmatic. And he discipled me for about 6 months. And then he took me aside and he said, "Tom, I need to tell you something." And I said, "Sure, Joel, what?" He said, "You're too emotional." And I said, "Huh?" And he said, "You're too emotional. You'd be a lot better off if you stopped being emotional." Now, I was working on a master's degree in music at the time, in singing. And I was doing some opera and it's like, wait a second, that's not what my teachers are telling me. If anything, I need to be more emotional. And so Joel, from his point of view, what Joel was saying when he said you're too emotional was he was saying you are not like me. I'm not emotional. You shouldn't be emotional either. Because Joel was looking at me as he was looking at the rest of the world. And remember, how many? What percentage of the world is phlegmatic?
50.
50% of the world is phlegmatic. So if you're phlegmatic, half the world looks normal to you, and the other half of the world looks nuts. They look crazy. So I looked crazy to Joel, and he thought he was doing me a favor by saying, you have to be less emotional. Okay? So, and if you know me, I'm just like how I am right now is pretty much how I was when I was in my 20s. Pretty laid back. I don't know, maybe some of you would say I'm emotional. I would think, I don't know, am I emotional? Okay, Grace says, no, I'm not emotional. Okay, this is how I was when I was in my 20s. Okay, so, but different people see you different ways. Don't be hard on them. Don't be hard on them. If you understand that people are wired differently and God has done this on purpose, then you can embrace those differences. If you don't understand that, if you see the world through just your eyes and not through anybody else, you'll think people are broken and they need to be fixed. Okay? We are not broken. But what does God see when he sees you? Ephesians 1:1 says, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God, to the saints which are at Ephesus, and to the faithful in Christ Jesus. And then he goes on to talk about stuff. But how did Paul see us? Paul saw us as saints. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God, to the saints which are at Ephesus, and to the faithful in Christ Jesus. What he was saying was, hi, if you are a believer, you are a saint. A saint means that you're set apart, that you're sacred or holy, set apart, dedicated to God. Okay, that's what a saint is. And Paul saw other believers as being saints in real time. Your essay question for the week: when God looks at you, what does he see? What does God think of you? Okay. I'm going to read it again. When God looks at you, what does he see? Put another way, what does God think of you? You can go ahead and Google that if you want to when you're writing your paper and see what other people say. Here's a guy, a Bible teacher who says we are not sinners saved by grace. He says we're not sinners saved by grace. We were sinners and we were saved by grace, but we're no longer sinners saved by grace. We're now saints. Our past tense was sinner. Our past situation was sinner. Our current situation is grace. I'll tell you some of the things that this author says, and you can kind of file them away if you want to. But he says we need to start viewing ourselves as God views us. And you're going to talk about how you think God views you. And you're going to write a paper on it. You're going to write a 250-word essay on it. But before you write that essay, I'm going to share some things that this author has said, because this is what this author thinks. And that's why I'm asking how God views you. Because this author says The truth is that we're classified as sinners before salvation, and this is how God used to view us. Upon salvation, we received positional holiness. And from God's point of view, remember, we're approaching this from God's point of view. We are no longer a sinner saved by grace. And he said you can't find any reference to that in the Bible anyways. You're not going to see sinner saved by grace in the Bible. And so he goes on in this article to say, how does God actually see us? What is God's attitude towards his children? If we start to understand how God sees us, then maybe we'll see how maybe we're looking at ourselves in the wrong way. And if we start looking at ourselves the way God sees us, maybe that'll change our effectiveness for the kingdom. The author goes on to say that Christians sin. He said, I'm not saying Christians don't sin, but he said because of Calvary, those sins have been erased and are not held against us anymore. Christ's sacrifice paid for every sin that you and I have ever committed or will commit in the future. The unbeliever is classified as a sinner since everything they do is sin. The Christian is called a saint, and the sooner we start thinking like saints instead of sinners, we will begin to see our Christian lives blossom. That's the words of this author. He goes on to say, the abundant life which Christ came to give us is not on the spiritual level of those who still view themselves as sinners, but those who realize that God has elevated their position to saint. If God views us as holy, which he does, and he does because what God sees is us in the blood of Christ. He sees us through the righteousness imputed on us because of Christ's sacrifice. Do you understand that? That's how God sees us. If I'm still a sinner, then should I consider myself a holy sinner? And the author says, no, they're not compatible. It's like oil and water. And no amount of homogenization can mix that. If you are saved, God no longer views you as a sinner. So why should you continue believing a statement, he says, right out of the pits of the camp of false humility? I'm just a sinner saved by grace. I was a sinner, but I'm no longer a sinner. God sees me, I do sin, but God sees me as righteous and holy. And that's because of the blood of Christ. So we continue to move along here. We might talk a little bit more about who we are and how God sees us, but you're going to write a paper on it. And if you find some scripture that you want to throw in there, great. I'm not trying to change your mind on this too much. I guess I am a little bit. But I want you to write about it. I want you to verbalize it. Okay. New page. Bill is a guy at church. And Bill came up to me one day about 8 years ago. And Bill said, you don't do enough hymns. And he said, I want you to do more hymns. Now, I had to have a conversation with Bill, and I said, we're not going to, and I said in so many words, Bill, we're not going to change the music we do. I have to do music for the whole congregation. And this is where we are. I said, I understand, Bill, if you need to go to another church that does hymns, because he was comparing us with another church that had all hymns. Why can't we be like this church that does all hymns? And I said, I understand if you need to leave our church and go to another church, to that church that does all hymns. And I said, and if you do, I'll be sad because I will miss you. But I understand if you need to go. And Bill said, "Oh, no, I'm not going to go." I said, "Why not?" He said, "I like it here a lot better." And I said, "Well, what about the hymns?" And he said, "Nah, I don't really like that other church. I'll just put up with it." Now, that was the last conversation I had with Bill on the subject of hymns. Like I said, it was about 7 or 8 years ago. Bill is still a member of the church and still very active in ministry in the church, and hasn't brought up hymns again, but has come up and said, "I really like that song that you did." Whatever, a contemporary song. And Bill is happy where he is. So I want to talk about volunteers. How's everything going in there? Classroom okay?
We're smelling
yeah,
a
we were-
burning smell, so.
There was a burning.
Burning smell?
It's just the heater. It's just heating up too fast.
Because it hasn't been on for a while.
Yeah.
And the dust settles in on the top, and what you're smelling is burning dust. And really you know what dust is, right?
No.
No.
Yes.
It's deceased people.
So we're basically smelling burning flesh.
It smells burning flesh.
Dust to dust.
Here's something unrelated. Here's a quick rabbit trail for you, rabbit hole. Realtors know this. If I go to sell my house and I'm living in it, I have to clean it. If I'm selling it, I have to clean it to keep it clean so that the realtor can come and show it to people and sell it. If no one is living in the house, you don't have to dust it. And the reason you don't have to dust it is because dust is human skin flakes, about 85% of it. So yeah, what you're smelling in the heater is burning flesh.
Seriously?
That's what my
Yeah.
grandma says. She doesn't like to dust her house because she feels bad if it's a relative. She doesn't like
That's funny.
Yeah, and now if you really want to get grossed out,
Oh, don't.
you get that stuff on your fruit sitting in the basket. If you have an open jar of peanut butter on the table, if you have your butter, you put the butter on the table or Thanksgiving dinner and it's sitting there for 2 hours, I guarantee you dust is settling on it. So in that sense, we're very mild cannibals, but we'll go on now that I've grossed you out. All right. And now you will need counseling, right? Okay. So how do we work with volunteers? What are keys to successful ministry? We talked about personality, correct? And we've talked about, okay, if I, for instance, I'm in a situation where my next most important person in terms of tasks is a phlegmatic. So there's me, and there's this individual that I work with. Communicate with that individual probably 7 or 8 times a week. I'm melancholy, and this individual is phlegmatic. And whenever I talk to the individual, I have to be thinking phlegmatic, phlegmatic, phlegmatic. Otherwise, he'll view me as a flake. Okay, so that's a direct application of what we've been talking about personality-wise. You not only want to understand how you come across to other people, but you want to understand how other people see your personality type and see the other personality types in the ministries that you're leading, so that you can help people through that process to be able to serve with one another and see that the way we are wired is the way we are wired, and God uses us through the strengths and weaknesses of our personality types. Now, again, I'm not telling you to ignore people when there's bad behavior. That's a different animal. Okay. So how do we work with volunteers? You are all going into vocational ministry, whether you're going into public schools or worship ministries or CCM or whatever it is that you're going into. You are going to be paid for being a musician. And you are probably going to be doing some leading and teaching. And if you're a teacher, you're going to be doing a lot of teaching. But ultimately, you are a Christian, a musician, and a leader. Music, philosophy, and leadership. That's why the class is called that. Here are some basic things to file away. Humility. Humility should be at the core of your leadership. Second, servant leadership. You should serve your ministry the way Christ serves the church. Servant leadership. Number 3, delegate and then hand off. Do not micromanage. Do give ownership. So number 3 is, when you are in ministry and leading, you delegate to other people because your job is to get them doing ministry. And so if I do everything as a leader of a ministry, or if I micromanage as a leader of a ministry, I allow no chance for the people that are working under me, under my leadership, to blossom in their own right as servant leaders. Because ultimately, we want to bring everybody up through the ranks to become mature Christians and to be able to lead others, right? And so if you micromanage, you take away the chance for somebody else to make a mistake. And if you don't give ownership, you place somebody in a position where they're very frustrated because no matter what they do, it's not going to matter. So number 3, delegate and then take your hands off. Don't micromanage, but do give ownership. Number 4, I get paid to do what I do. I get paid at church to do music ministry and to lead worship. Everyone else associated with my ministry is a volunteer. Number 4 is affirm with 3 exclamation points. When you are a leader in ministry, you need to affirm, not falsely affirm, but affirm the people working under you. You do that by telling them they did a good job, by pointing them out to others that they're doing a good job, by coming alongside them and helping them when they need help. You affirm them by telling them how much you appreciate them. And you also affirm them when you carefully let them know that they could do something in a different way and probably do it more efficiently. When you love them, you affirm them when you love them. Why do you affirm? Because that's how they get paid. Now, they're also getting paid by crowns, jewels in the crown and stuff like that, and the rewards are in heaven. But the truth is that human beings are human beings, and everybody that's working for you in your ministry will respond to affirmation, just like you respond to affirmation. Don't you want to hear me say you did a good job as opposed to you did a lousy job if you hand in a project? Or that you got something, or that, hey, that's cool, you got that concept I was trying to teach? Okay, that's affirmation. Affirmation is saying you did a good job. Affirmation is saying, no, you're not broken. You are hardwired exactly the way God has chosen for ministry in your area. Okay, that's how you affirm people. There's other ways to do it too, obviously. Okay, so affirm. Number 5, set people up for success. I don't place somebody in a position where they are bound to fail. When I say that I delegate and then I take my hands off of someone, I make sure that I'm putting them into a job they can have success in the first place. Now, it may challenge them. It may even drive them crazy. But you want to make sure that you're setting your volunteers up for success. Don't give them the jobs you hate that they can't be successful in. Actually, try to give them the jobs you hate that they can be successful in. Then you have a win-win all the way around. So when I hired Teresa, I gave her the jobs I didn't want to do because she likes those jobs. And it didn't make sense for me to do jobs I didn't like to do when she liked jobs, the jobs that I didn't like to do, and she would run with them and do a great job. Okay. Now, sometimes you're going to do jobs you don't like to do. That's part of ministry. But I'm just saying, set people up for success. Number 6, take the arrows. When I say take the arrows, I mean you take the arrows for the people in your ministry. Don't let somebody down the chain of command take criticism for a ministry that you lead. If they make an error in judgment, or if they have a problem, or if something blows up, you as the leader of the ministry take responsibility for it. If you don't do that, the people in your ministry will not feel safe and will feel as though they are not covered from problems that might happen. Now, obviously, if there's somebody in your ministry that commits an egregious sin, a felony, they go in and rob a liquor store, that doesn't mean that you have to go plead guilty to the crime. That's not what I'm talking about, and I think you understand that. I'm talking about inevitably things will blow up in ministry. Somebody will say something or do something or make a decision. Your job is to take the heat, take the arrows for errors that occur down the chain of command. I've had bosses I've worked for that didn't understand that, and it puts you in a position where if you make a mistake, there's no place to hide. Okay? It's called, now the term nowadays would be throwing somebody under the bus. Don't allow anyone to throw any of your volunteers under the bus. Number 7, support and train your volunteers and correct them when necessary. Support and train and correct them when necessary. Number 8, take the hurdles out of their way. One of my main jobs as a worship pastor, and one of my main jobs when I was department chair, was to clear the hurdles out of the way of the people that were working for me. So for other professors in the music department, when I was department chair, I would try to assess what possible hurdles might hinder a person's ministry as a professor, as a teacher, and I would work to try to minimize or eliminate those hurdles. That's part of my job. And I do it every Sunday at church. So I have a situation where I had a gentleman, there's a gentleman in the church, very musical, and for years and years, he was not involved in the music ministry because of a job commitment. And last year, he came back into the ministry, and he plays guitar, has a beautiful voice. And a few months ago, he had a work accident and cut off 2 of his 2 fingers in his left hand that you use to chord on the guitar. Okay, and the guitar is pretty much his how he views his himself in ministry. He views himself as a music singer, guitar player for Christ, and that's a major part of his life. And to lose these 2 fingers is tough. Now, fortunately, they got a good plastic surgeon. They sewed his fingers back on, and this finger is still not bending and doesn't have the strength that it should. So I looked for ways to pull him back into the ministry, to affirm him as a musician without his guitar. And he was out for about a month and a half, and I think he was really sad about it. I pulled him back in, and we found other ways for him to minister musically, and now he's back into doing music every Sunday. He's there in the praise band. So look for ways to take the hurdles out of the way of people. Number 9, your volunteers will generally not do the jobs you assign to them the way that you would have done them. And that's okay. Number 10, it is never about the job. It is always about the relationship. Ministry is never about the job. It is always about the relationship. Just like heaven. If you remember that, you're going to do very well. Okay, this is the way apologies work. If you blow it and you do something wrong, you apologize. It is not an apology if the word but is in it. You understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
A qualified apology is not an apology. I'm sorry I did that, but no. I'm sorry I did that is an apology. And the moment you put but in the sentence, it's no longer an apology. It's justification for your sin against that person. Apologies contain no buts. All right, conflict resolution, because conflicts will come up, and that's just the way it works. I'd like to tell you there isn't conflicts in the church, but you've already been through enough stuff at Calvary in your church situations, your experiences, that you know that conflict is unavoidable. So I want to talk about conflict resolution styles. The world says there are 5 types of conflict resolution styles. There's avoidance conflict style, yielding conflict style, competitive conflict style, and I'll say these again, cooperation conflict style, and conciliation conflict style. Okay, 5 conflict resolution styles. Avoidance conflict style. This is how one approaches conflicts. Now, it's interesting. I have situations where I think I've had bosses that come under every one of these categories. And as I talk about it, you're going to have at least 1 or 2 of these that you've experienced yourself. Avoidance conflict style is the tendency to be unassertive and uncooperative while you diplomatically sidestep an issue or you simply withdraw from a threatening situation. So avoidance conflict style works like this. There's a conflict going on, maybe between 2 people, or maybe, let's say, between you and another person. And the way avoidance conflict style works is that you move away from that person and you don't try to solve the conflict. Now, a lot of times, avoidance conflict style will end up meaning that maybe you had a strong relationship with somebody yesterday, but today that relationship is destroyed because you're trying to avoid contact with them. That's avoidance conflict style, okay? And that is a form of conflict resolution. It's not a very good form of conflict resolution, but it's one that we often choose. Style number 2, these are in no particular order. Yielding conflict style. Yielding conflict style, there's another conflict style called competitive conflict style. And yielding conflict style is the opposite of competing conflict style. Yielding conflict style works like this. There is you throw yourself on your sword. It's an element of self-sacrifice that you try to pull off when you accommodate the other person's issue. Now, the way it works is this. Something happens between us, and you want this as a resolution, and I want this as a resolution, and I say, okay, fine, we're just going to do it the way you want to do it. Now, this often happens in marriages, where the stronger of the 2 marriage team will say to the weaker of the two people on that team something, and the weaker person on the team will say, fine, we'll just do it your way. And the problem with a yielding conflict style is that you end up taking advantage of the weak, and you're going to ultimately end up causing resentment. Okay, so we see that in marriage. We see that maybe between two partners in a business, yielding conflict style. Now, on the other hand, competitive conflict style, number 3, that's when you're assertive and uncooperative, and you want your own needs met over at the expense of the other person's needs. Okay, so competitive conflict style, back to the marriage version of that, is you have the dominating person pushing for their solution, and they're devouring that weak person, and that's a competitive conflict style. That's a wrong style. It's a wrong way to do it. Number 4, cooperation conflict style. Cooperation conflict style is a combination of being assertive and cooperative. It's where you try to work with others to identify a solution that that tries to satisfy at as high a level as possible the solution across everyone's plate, so that you're trying to make everybody happy is what's going on. This is the opposite of the avoiding style. The avoiding style is you ignore it. The cooperation style is you try to engage it, and you want to ultimately get it into a point where all sides get an equal amount of good and the smallest amount of negative, so that you're reducing negative feelings. And that's certainly better than the first 3. Then there's number 5, the conciliation conflict style, which is the compromising conflict style. And that aids to find an expedient, mutually acceptable solution that partially satisfies both parties while maintaining some assertiveness and cooperativeness. So it's similar to cooperation, a little bit different, because people have to compromise to make this one happen. So conciliation or compromising is like cooperation, but each party has to give up something or compromise something. All right, I want to talk about conflict resolution from a Christian point of view. Yes. Oh, is that a question?
Yeah. What kind of conflict resolution styles do you think typical temperaments would have based on each individual temperament?
Cholerics go absolutely for competitive conflict. Absolutely. That is a typical choleric. As a matter of fact, if you're standing there with somebody and they're fighting for their position and they're telling you everything wrong with your position, they're probably cholerics. Okay. A yielding conflict style, avoidance conflict style is going to be like a phlegmatic. A yielding conflict style is going to be like a melancholy. A melancholy is just going to try to say, okay, fine, whatever you want to do is fine. I don't want to, and any personality type can adopt any of these. It just depends on whose ox is getting gored and for what reason. So some people, even the same person, some people can be avoidance conflict style or yielding conflict style unless it pertains to their child, and then they become a competitive conflict style person. So it depends on what the situation is quite often. But there are some that are linked to definite personality types. The conciliation conflict style, cooperation conflict style, that would be more of a sanguine. So if you had 4 or 5 sanguines they'd all be trying to help each other and what can we do to make this work and anyway. Does that help? Okay, let's talk about conflict resolution from a Christian point of view. I don't know that this is thick, but I would say that it's different. Okay?
Oh, you have to raise your hand for me.
Oh, the only arms I can see are Catherine's and Grace.
Oh, right. Okay.
Question?
Hey, can we do a short break?
Yes.
I need to pee.
Me too, really.
Yeah.
I do too.
We'll come back from a Christian point of view. Okay. 10 minutes. Back at 201, 210, 211, 211. All right, we continue. How are things going in there, Grace?
She's winning all the pun battles.
Uh,
Oh wait, never
Grace
mind.
wins
Grace
every
wins
time.
every time. Okay.
It's just Logan, Josh, and I for right
Yeah.
now.
okay. We'll wait a few minutes. Everybody's out having a smoke, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it smelled like smoke.
That's what it is.
Grace had dad jokes for days.
The room kind of smells like smoke, though.
That's just brain flush.
No, just brain flesh.
Brain
Yeah.
flush. I thought it, like, I made the correlation that, like, dust and dirt were the same, but I guess that not.
He's at death this year.
Yeah, I thought dust was dirt.
For sure, you can think.
Hmm?
I think some of it is. Like, we live on a gravel road, and like the dust from the gravel road,
Oh, that would make
it
sense.
seeps in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
It's just like death is different because death is a concept. It's a somebody's body is not.
Okay.
So it makes sense to say like particles, like dead particles off of their body. That's what it is.
There.
But not death itself.
Okay. Okay. Bring on. I'll talk about brain flush.
Too late. Let's talk about how. There you go.
No. I refuse. I should have copied that.
Yeah. So what personality type do you think you are again?
Well,
I put you. You're passionate.
I think we're all here, Dr. Tom.
Okay.
So I have a
All right. So I'll finish up with this. Conflict resolution from a Christian point of view. Number one, don't try to win. Number two, avoid the need to explain yourself. Again, it goes back to if they only knew why I want it to go this way, if they only understood why. Look, nobody's going to understand. Nobody's going to want to understand why you want it a certain way and they want it a different way. So in resolution, don't even look to explain yourself. Just affirm the other person. So when Bill came in and talked to me, I didn't tell him. I didn't try to explain to him the way I felt. I just told him we weren't going to make those changes because that wasn't who we were. When he came in to talk about the hymns, right? But affirm, and then look for common ground. Look where you are both in agreement. Even the Republicans and the Democrats should be able to find some areas of agreement this season. Next, acknowledge the differences that you have. And then don't beat around the bush. If something is not going to change, don't sugarcoat it. If there's a conflict that's happening because of some policy in your church, and that policy isn't going to change, you don't have to apologize for it. You just don't sugarcoat it. Just be as clear about it as you can. And lastly, humility. Matter of fact, humility is at the core of just about everything. If you look at how Christ dealt with people, it was always with this incredible sense of humility and deference to the people he was talking to. This is God, the God of the universe. So, okay. All right. Let's see. I think I am going to. I want to start. Sometimes I jump around a little bit. I want to start with. I want to start the Rory book, Art of an Artist. If you have that handy, you can take it out. If you don't have it with you, that's okay. You should have read up through chapter 4 at this point. It'll be more meaningful for you if you stay up with the reading. The book is actually really well written, and I think it's very applicable to us as artists. And even if you, I'll say it this way, it would be difficult for you to be an artist and not have some melancholy in your personality someplace. So even if you are predominantly a phlegmatic or sanguine or a choleric, you're probably a choleric melancholy or a sanguine melancholy or a phlegmatic melancholy. Though probably half or more of you in the room are melancholies. So again, understanding that only 20% of the population is melancholy, but most of the people you'll run into as musicians are melancholies. It's worth talking about some of these things. And indeed, Rory talks about melancholies in his book too. So we want to start with, even the intro of this book is great. In the very beginning, he talks about character flaws. And he talks specifically about character flaws that musicians tend to have. Selfishness, pride, perfectionism, defensiveness, jealousy, envy, emotional imbalance, and a lack of discipline. Now, can anybody give me some examples of some of those character flaws? How about selfishness?
We have the mentality, well, some of us have the mentality, that we want to be the best. And that goes along with perfectionism, wanting to be as, I don't know, our ideal image of perfection, even though it's impossible to attain.
Okay, so we'll jump around then. So Grace, you're talking about perfectionism, right?
Yeah, I know it's linked to selfishness.
Okay, so perfectionism and selfishness are kind of very close cousins, aren't they? And so it's tough because you go into a, let's say an applied lesson, whether it's piano or guitar or voice, and your goal is to get better at your instrument of choice. And the goal of your teacher is to help you get better. And so conversations are always about, in lessons, are always about what you're doing, maybe what you're doing poorly, and what you can do better. So there's a natural aspect of our art, practicing our art in craft, that is, it's like the the flames of perfectionism are fanned by those things. And so, so perfectionism and selfishness. Okay. Somebody have some other ideas on pride or?
In high school, pride was an issue that was overtaking my life, and it was taking the focus off of Christ, and I had to be confronted by it.
Okay. So Logan, you're saying you personally have had issues with pride.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did and where did the and that's certainly character flaw. Where did the pride get in the way then?
It was it was in music. I was using the gifts that God had given me, and then I was using them like on a platform, and then it was starting to become like, oh, look what I can do instead of what God has given me. And an older lady in our church saw the flaw and confronted me on it. And
wow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. And you understand she did that out of a sense of love for you.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. One of the big mentors in my life was her.
Great. Excellent.
Yep.
Okay. How about anybody have any issues with defensiveness?
That's me.
Francine,
Sure.
raise her hand.
Still
Okay.
with it.
Francine, go for it.
That's all I have to say. I'm super defensive, I guess. I was talking to my mom about it the other day, and just I want to protect my craft so bad that I don't want anyone to like judge it, I guess, and that's something I really want to work on. That probably didn't come out correct, but I hope you know what I mean. So.
Yeah. So defensiveness is part of self-protection, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. And when we're self-protective, when we're defensive, when we're self-protective, we hold people at bay. We don't let them in, and hard to be vulnerable. And okay. And that's hard. I think we all. I think at one point or another, we probably all suffered from all of these things. How about jealousy? Anybody have any issues with jealousy?
Yeah.
Who?
Right.
Mariah.
Yeah.
Go for it, Mariah.
So I have this mentality where I'm always looking at other people and saying, okay, what do they have that I don't? And it's been really hard for me, and it's something that I've been able to work on in the last couple of months. But it was really getting in the way of, especially like my spiritual life, but like my music, because I would just get so discouraged by watching other musicians and seeing what they had that I didn't. And it takes a real effort for me sometimes to like watch other people succeed and realize that their success is not a threat to me. It's really easy for me to look at the people around me as, you know, obstacles that I have to be better than.
Wow, that's cool. I guess it's that point where you can realize that other people's success doesn't detract from your own success. They can be successful, and it's not going to hurt your success. But jealousy, but all of these things, jealousy and defensiveness, and absolutely perfectionism. I know, just I can dither over things because to try to make them perfect. They're debilitating. These are not only things that drive a wedge between us and other people, and certainly in how we would approach God, but they're destructive. We end up doing damage to ourselves, and it prevents us from becoming the people that God wants us to be. How about envy? I guess jealousy and envy are kind of close cousins too. Envy, anybody?
Well, I mean, of course I've dealt with like all those previously mentioned things, but envy is a big one for me, where I I want to be so excellent that I hinder my growth. Like I'm doing Beethoven Sonata for my senior recital, but sometimes because I envy how other people can perform it and play it, I don't want to even practice, and so I hinder my growth because I want to be so excellent, for prideful reasons, and then just thinking, or just even thinking about how other people can probably play it effortlessly is something that that it's preventing me from actually growing. So, yeah, especially third movement, that gets crazy. But yeah,
It's Beethoven.
yeah. So.
And there's there is a unfortunately, the world's version of music. We shouldn't feel this way as Christians. I know we do, but the world wants to tell us if we're an opera singer and we're not singing at the Met, then we didn't make it, or that what we're doing is not legitimate. Or if we're doing a Messiah at Calvary and we're not doing the Messiah at downtown at the big auditorium, then that's not a legitimate Messiah. Or if I'm doing Beethoven and my Beethoven is good, but it's not as good as the recording that I hear on the CD, then I'm not a very good pianist, or that my Beethoven is no longer legitimate or relevant. And the truth is that there are people who function at a very, very high level in the world of music, but they're not the arbiters of what I do, and they're not the ones who can tell me whether or not what I'm doing is legitimate music. Yes.
Well, and then I tend to get into this very dangerous line of thought to where I am not the best in the room, then I feel like my gift is useless, which
Right.
is not. But sometimes I feel like that. It's like I am not,
You're not the best.
I am not above like average, and so why do I even like music? Like this is a waste of time.
Yeah.
We often have those thoughts, and I tend to envy someone else's experiences, without even considering that my parents like paid a lot of money for me to get piano lessons, but I'm like, oh, I didn't even get to like do this in high school or do that, and so therefore it's their fault that I'm not a great pianist type of thing. And it's really dangerous. And yeah.
That's interesting. And Catherine, so where that envy comes in is you wish you were a better pianist. And so what ends up happening is you end up comparing yourself to somebody above you in terms of ability, instead of somebody like me, where I can't hold a candle to your ability to play piano.
Well, I tend.
No, I mean,
Okay.
this is what we do. We don't compare ourselves to people who aren't as good as we are. We try to find people who are better we are, then compare ourselves with them, right? And if we do any kind of comparing, if I compare myself with somebody better than me, that's envy and jealousy. But if I compare myself with somebody who's less than me, that's pride, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry.
and we all do it. We all do it.
Yeah. I guess to put it like in short words, I envy people who are really good at one thing, because I can defend myself in piano and I can, sing, but I'm not excellent at like both of them. I'm just, I can defend myself in both, and I enjoy doing both so much, but I'm not like 100%, great, at one thing, and so that's when envy comes. I think that's like I wish I was so good at like jazz, or like I specialize in like one genre, like ragtime or something, and then that could be my thing. But I don't, that's.
Well, there are in any area, certainly in music, there are people who are specialists and there are people who are generalists. Okay, and the music world needs both of those folks. The music world needs people who are really, really good at one thing. And usually the people that are really, really good at one thing aren't good at a whole lot of other things because they focus so much on that one thing. But the world also desperately needs people who are pretty good at a lot of things. There's a place for both of those. But ultimately, God is interested in our heart. And God, I don't want to speak for God. I think we do that sometimes. But would God be more interested in somebody who's sold out for him, that is a mediocre musician, let's say, who has a heart for God? Or would he rather listen to the music of somebody who's really the best vocalist or best pianist the world's ever seen, but they really don't care about their relationship with God? I mean, I think that's an obvious answer, right? God's concerned with the heart. And let's keep working through the list. How about emotional imbalance? Anybody experience any emotional imbalance recently?
Yeah, that would be myself. I'm sorry.
We're musicians.
What? Wait, what? No.
Oh, Josh.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of, I would call myself emotionally unbalanced a lot of times. I don't know why it is. I mean, obviously because it's kind of in my nature. I've gotten, I think over the course of the years, like I've learned to kind of control them a lot better. Like I think kid, but I wouldn't call myself as a kid like really like just an angry. Like I've learned to kind of control. Like if I ever get angry as a kid, like getting sad or etc. Yeah, I can't explain it. Like there are times where I can kind of fall off the deep end emotionally, and it's hard to explain. So.
Okay, we could probably all say that. So there are certain things though that might trigger you, and
certain things that I might consume in media, certain things that might pop up in conversation that would trigger me emotionally, and for positive or for negative, and I had to work to kind of get myself back to that state of normalcy, or whatever it is.
So are emotional responses to things wrong?
No, absolutely not.
No, okay.
But there is a line where you can't be constantly controlled. Your life can be run just simply by emotion, because
Very good.
It says in the Bible we are. I mean, I'm not direct quote, but we are basically our own worst enemy or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's great. That's a great point. So it's all right to have emotional responses to things as long as those emotional responses are appropriate. So if somebody says they don't like my singing, what I want to do is accept it graciously and with maturity and humility. And of course, if in all things I'm trying to practice humility, then when somebody says something about me that personally, and if I'm trying to act with humility, then I realize that I got an email from somebody yesterday, and they thanked me for something. They thanked me for a conversation I had with them a few years ago, and thanked me for wise counsel. And my response to them, and it was, I can, and I hope it was with not with false pride or false humility, but I truly felt, at least at the time, that any good that anybody would get from anything I would say is Christ. The only thing good I have to say is when I can point somebody to Christ. And what does the Bible say? That's not wisdom on my part. That's just God's infinite wisdom. And I'm just really thrilled that God might use you or might use me in ministry. That's an amazing thought. But on the other hand, if when my kids were little, if one of my kids were attacked by a crazed guy with a knife or by some pedophile, I shudder to think what I would do out of just the anger that I would have as a parent. So there are, and I'm not telling you that's the kind of response you should have in that situation. I'm just saying that there are times when anger is a perfectly acceptable, appropriate response to a situation. But way too much, with some of these things, defensiveness and anger and the character flaws in that is the application when that situation doesn't warrant it. But there are going to be times when you're going to be in situations that demand strong responses emotionally. Certainly Christ demonstrated that when he turned over the money changers' tables in the temple. I think it was pretty clear that he showed anger in that situation, but it's certainly a righteous anger. And I don't want to make righteous anger sound trite. But what we're looking for is this kind of balance in our emotions as we deal with people. And if we understand, if we're melancholy, let's see, Josh, what temperament were you? Like
emotionally unbalanced.
Oh, emotion, but I mean, what temperament? Choleric? It was phlegmatic.
Oh, phlegmatic.
Yeah, phlegmatic. Okay, so phlegmatic, what's interesting is that a phlegmatic tends to be pretty stable. And so it's interesting. Your emotional imbalance may seem a lot less imbalanced to somebody else as it does to you. Of course, you're the one that's internalizing, so you're the one that's feeling it. All right. How about lack of discipline? Anybody have any issues with lack of discipline?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, specific areas of
I eat a lot of cookies, but I'm pretty good about practicing.
I think it depends because I'll hyper focus on certain areas, and then basically the areas that I feel passionate about, I'll just go for it. But then the areas that I need to do that I don't enjoy, it's really hard for me to have a consistent schedule to work on those things. And that's what I really struggle with.
I struggle with that a lot. For example, I know that I have to practice Hanon every day so I can get better at piano, but instead I do it a day before my lesson.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Look, I took applied lessons once upon a time. I know what it's like.
So
Yeah. Okay. So we've all these character flaws are things we have a nodding acquaintance with at least some of them. So here's something that's interesting. I like this in the book. I'll read it. This is on, if you have your book, it's on page 13. It's Irving Stone from Lust for Life. It says, but then no artist is normal. If he were, he wouldn't be an artist. Normal men and women don't create works of art. They eat, sleep, hold down routine jobs, and die. You are hypersensitive as an artist to life and nature. That's why you're able to interpret for the rest of us. But if you're not careful, that very hypersensitiveness will lead you to your destruction. The strain of it breaks every artist in time. I don't know that it has to break you. I don't feel that it's, I don't feel that you have to be broken by the strain of hypersensitivity. But I think by the grace of God, we can handle the way that we're hardwired as artists. And whether you're melancholy or phlegmatic or choleric or sanguine, I think we can learn within the grace of God, by the grace of God, to be able to function again in this way that we're hardwired towards artistic expression and not have it destroy us. And I think that's one of the sweet things about being a Christian artist. And I'm not talking about CCM specifically or worship pastor specifically. I'm talking about being a Christian who's hardwired towards things, to be sensitive towards things that are of beauty, and certainly music specifically. Okay, so chapter 1 in this book is about character. And he goes on to talk about, on page 15, as he gets into it, he talks about the melancholy temperament. Does anybody remember anything that he said about that?
Not in a bad way, but he seemed to kind of generalize artists into that particular category.
Okay. And what does he call it?
The melancholy temperament, I think.
Yep. And then he ends up qualifying it with a different phrase on page 19. He calls it the artistic temperament. The artistic temperament. And so if we don't connect it to melancholy, so because we all have this, then we don't have to worry about whether we're melancholy or choleric or whatever. But if we call it an artistic temperament and just say that as artists, we do have that temperament, and that temperament is, our somebody once said to me, our greatest strengths end up being our greatest weaknesses. And the hypersensitivity to beauty and artistic expression are exactly what leads us to the character flaws of selfishness, pride, perfectionism, defensiveness, jealousy, envy, emotional imbalance, and lack of discipline. So if I wasn't looking at the world through these kind of artistic temperament eyes, I would be much less likely towards some of those character flaws. So I would have to say, I think, and we will talk about this in another class, pride is certainly at the core of just about every major, I think, sinful thought and deed that we have. I think ultimately it comes back to pride. But the artistic temperament that we have is a very specific temperament. And it's the reason why in churches, so often the artists are the ones that can be a source of conflict, certainly between let's say the worship pastor and the senior pastor, or the worship leader, the guy playing the guitar with other people in ministry, in the church. But the artistic temperament goes way, way back. So, and the book talks about this, but if you go all the way back to even the Renaissance, they were writing about it, and those of you who are in music history, we're in the middle of the Renaissance right now. But in the Renaissance, that artistic temperament was encouraged to the extent where I think people were even faking it because the more outrageous and temperamental and abnormal the more temperamental you were as an artist, the more they considered you to be a genius. And we see that continuing even into the Romantic period. This idea that of the tortured genius. And so Beethoven was revered in the 1800s. He was given preference because he was Beethoven. He got upset if somebody didn't cook his meals correctly. He got upset if there was noise that he didn't like. He was very, very difficult to deal with. He ends up basically raising his nephew and drives the nephew to the point where the nephew kills himself. Okay, so Beethoven was a deeply, deeply flawed man. And when we look at different musicians, we see this kind of repeat over and over of these dramatically flawed human beings who make this wonderful music. So it has been there. It's been a stigma. It's sometimes in history. It's been the temperament was called sin. At other times in history, like in the Renaissance, the temperament was celebrated and encouraged. I think what we want to do is find the balance in it and talk about how God has, just like God chose Moses for specific tasks, or Abraham to do specific things, God has chosen us specifically to serve him through the arts. Now, for some of us, it's clearly music. Some of us are so focused on the music that we need to continue to remind ourselves that we're serving God with it in whatever we choose to do. But there are some of us with artistic temperaments. Catherine Phillips is a multi-artistic, is a artistic expression. Her artistic expression is through multiple forms of artwork. And it's not just music, but she's drawn to all these other different artistic endeavors. It's who she is. I think we're all like this to some extent or another. If I get a few extra hours, I go down to my workshop and try to build something out of wood, because I get great pleasure in creating and taking a raw piece of wood and cutting it up and gluing it together and making something functional out of it. Again, it's a sense of artistic expression for me. Some of us do music and we write poems and we end up being songwriters. Some of us do music and sing, or some of us do music and lead worship at churches. So there are this temperament has us wired to do these kinds of things. Why not, and I'm going to use the word reclaim, why not reclaim the arts for Christ? The arts are powerful. We are specifically gifted to work in this area by temperament. And there was a time, if you're in my history class, you'll hear me talk about God to monarchs to men. There was a time where artists served the church. And the focus was of such great humility that the number one artist of the medieval period is who? Music history class. Who was the most prolific artist that lived in the medieval period? Wrote more music than anybody else. Who?
No.
This individual wrote more music than anybody else during the medieval period. Who is it?
Unknown.
Anonymous.
Anonymous.
That's right.
Anonymous.
Okay.
No,
It's not.
That's a trick question.
Okay. The point is that in the medieval period, the focus was so much on God that people didn't sign their works. Now that, I don't think that's false humility. I think that's real humility. And that's the first 1,000 years of Christianity. We know very little about the musicians who were making music during the first 1,000 years of Christianity because nobody talked about them. There's some exceptions. And there's some accidental, wonderful surprises like Hildegard. But for the most part, we don't know anything about these people because their lives didn't matter. Their music was made for God. Wouldn't it be great if the church took back the arts? Wouldn't it be great if we took back music for Christ? So I'm excited to be doing what I'm doing as a teacher, because I can say to you as students, once upon a time, the church owned music. Virtually everything that was being produced and preserved was being produced and preserved for the church. Other music was happening, but it wasn't considered important enough to save. Just the music being written for the church. So this is before the Renaissance. So I want to say this, don't limit how God might use your gifts. Now, the book goes on to talk about, it talks about CCM and it talks about some other things. But I would say, I think I want to paraphrase that and say, you're more than a Christian songwriter. You are more than a Christian pianist. Catherine, you're more than a Christian pianist playing Beethoven. You know, Mariah, you're more than a Christian singer singing songs. Our Christianity goes beyond that. Our temperament allows us to serve God in a very unique way. The church has been, we've come through a really tough time for the arts in church. After the Reformation, and Calvin had a lot to do with this. John Calvin got rid of all the instruments. He got rid of all the trappings, all the paintings, all the tapestries. He got rid of the big stained glass windows, and he said, we're going to have church, but it's going to be austere, and it's going to be dry, and we're not going to do anything that at all shows the accomplishments of men. And so he got rid of anything that we would consider beautiful. I think there's a place in church for beautiful stained glass or wall hangings or beautiful music or well-crafted music. There's a place for all of that. And but the church abandoned that after the Reformation. Not all churches and not all countries, but there was a dramatic fall off in the use of the arts in church. And when the church, what happened to the arts when the church abandoned them?
They went secular.
They went secular. And so what happened was, if the church wasn't going to use them, those of us alive at the time, I wasn't, but had I been alive at the time, and if the church said, we're no longer going to have these really cool compositions made, then I would have found another place to do my really cool compositions, because that's how God wired me. So when the church abandoned the arts back in the 1500s, the arts went someplace else. And we went from having a situation where arts were used for the glory of God, for his exaltation, and as ways that men could be creative, men and women could be creative, and ended up being co-opted by secular uh, sometimes atheists, sometimes people hostile to the church, sometimes people, something that's, I think indifference is worse than hate. At least with hate, I know what my enemy is. But indifference and apathy are a horrible thing. And I think the opposite of love is apathy, is I don't care. And so the church has into the 20th, beginning of the 21st century, the church started to rethink its position on the arts, and some denominations are now pulling the arts back in and making an important part of Christian expression. So you're alive at a great time. Now, the church you go to may not value the arts, but the church is ripe for people with artistic temperaments who may not be the best singers or the best pianists or the best guitarists in the world, but they do understand how important the arts are for the church, for Christian expression, and they're uniquely positioned to go in and serve the church that way. What are the good things that come from the arts in church? How can we use the arts in church? Worship. That's a big one. Okay. And variety of worship is, I think, is sweet. I think it's sweet to have hymns and electric guitars. I think it's or pop or contemporary music. I think it's sweet to have organs, and I think it's sweet to have praise bands. I think it's sweet to have soloists, and I think it's sweet to have choirs. Praise God, we have all of this variety in church music now, and it's all being accepted. What else?
It can be used to tell a story, like some of the stained glass. They're pictures of stories that you can walk around and see.
Yeah, absolutely. So music is uniquely positioned to tell the story of the gospel, to tell the story of our own humanity and our failings, to tell the story of sin and redemption. So music is great for that. What else?
Well, I think it overall to point people to God, to be like, hey, our Creator created someone that can, do something like this. Like this class, like God created someone to do that. Like that's just amazing.
Music in the church is evangelical. It can be evangelical. There are people who become Christian because of songs. They'll hear a song, they're drawn to it, they're drawn to the church, or they're drawn to the music, they're drawn to the church, and they end up becoming Christians. There are some songs that have tremendous gospel message. And so music is evangelical. What else?
We can create unique expressions of worship.
Okay. So expressions of worship. Yep, go ahead.
Yep, just as David says, creating a new song or singing a new song into the Lord. It's always weird to do that.
Okay. So just as the unique and varied expressions of worship and adoration. How about for somebody like me who's hardwired to be creative? What does music in the church do? Sounds selfish, but
Well, it's a tool.
it is. It's a great tool.
To use for the glory of God. I think, when God creates us as creative people, He gives us art and He says, you were created to glorify me. So here, glorify me.
Yeah. Very good. So He's giving us those tools. How about, do you have any little brothers and sisters, or do you babysit anybody, or do you have any children if you're online? I'm talking about little kids now. Let's say you're babysitting a little kid, and that little kid loves you, and they love it when you babysit them, and you decide you go to the freezer and there's a nice popsicle in there, and you take that popsicle out and you hand it to that little kid, and the kid is ecstatic with joy that you would hand them that popsicle and make their day because you've given them such a treat. Have you ever had that experience?
Yeah, I did.
When mom doesn't let them have popsicles.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Have a
how about like a bell pepper? I don't know what. Might be a
Yeah,
great-
jalapeno.
Okay, whatever. You understand what I'm saying, though. Okay, I look at music in the church as a gift that God has given me. Like my wife. My wife is a gift to me, and I adore her, and that I thank God for that. God gave me music. He hardwired me for music, and then he gave me an outlet for that. So for me, the church also provides a way for me to express my creativity through the craft of music. Where else could I go and put together a band and put together a set of music and play it and sing? I remember when I was don't you guys weren't you when you were growing up, didn't you pretend to do air bands and sing along with songs and do that?
oh yeah.
Heck yeah.
Right? Do you remember how much fun that was to put your favorite record on and grab a broomstick or a pole or something and sing into it like a rock star? I get to do that every Sunday. And even at my age, I love getting up in front of people and singing. And if I can sing for God, that's all the better. So even I don't even think the book talks about this, but even there, God giving me the delights of my heart, serving him through music. I mean, God is not a God of confusion. He didn't give me this artistic temperament and then ask me to go work on cars for a living. He could have, but he didn't. But if he had, I would have figured out a way to do it creatively. But what he did was he gave me an artistic temperament, and then he gave me an outlet for that artistic temperament. That is amazing. Now, I can say that now, having been a stockbroker for 15 years and having no outlet at all during that 15 years. As a very, very dry period for me musically. As Mariah was sharing about with the jealousy and the envy thing there, it was so bad for me in that 15 years as a stockbroker. I mean, I had a good life, I had a nice family, nice income, prestigious job, but I couldn't go to concerts because there were people making music and I wasn't. I stopped listening to music because there were people making music and I wasn't. And I understand that's an attitude, that's a problem with my heart. But it was so painful. It was less even jealousy and envy as much as it was just painful that I wasn't getting to do it. And God is faithful. And if somebody had told me before I started at Merrill Lynch that I was hardwired for music, and nobody did. I had to figure this out on my own, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. If somebody had told me that God wanted to use me in my areas of giftedness, after I became a Christian, and I really understood it, really took it to heart, I probably wouldn't have ended up at Merrill Lynch. And then all of a sudden, Jennifer Monroe says, you're a green dot. You're in the wrong job. And that's when it all came together for me. And I understood that God has me, God has made me in a unique way. And when I left Merrill Lynch, and I've shared this with other classes, when I left Merrill Lynch, there were a number of people that said, "What are you, crazy? Why would you leave the money and the all the trappings that go along with the trips?" Merrill Lynch sent me to Paris and Vienna, all sorts of places. And Calvary has sent me to Raytown. So they asked me, "Why would you leave all this to go back to school?" And there were a few folks that were actually artists, a few painters that I had as clients. But the best one was a guy who was a retired band director from the local high school, who wrote me a note and said, "Congratulations on chasing your dream. I understand." And he got it. I didn't even have to explain anything to him. It was like, "What are you waiting for? Why did you wait this long? Why did you wait 15 years? So the fact that we have someplace, ladies and gentlemen, the fact that God has wired you, and that there are actually vocations where you can make a living and support your family, doing the stuff that God has wired you to do, which means that you're going to love it. That's a wonderful blessing. And so what we want to do is make sure we're doing the things that we should be doing. Let's see, what else do we have in here? Do I want to stop there? Or I think I know what. Going on in the book, there's we'll get into this more next week. But this is John Donne. John Donne was a poet and a priest. He was a lawyer. He was a dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, and he was a member of Parliament. He had 12 kids, and he lived from 1572 to 1631. So this was around the end of the Renaissance, beginning of the Baroque. But as a poet, he wrote some, stuff that's really, he says, this is the beginning of chapter 1, and you can go back and read it. "Batter my heart, three-person God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, or throw me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like a usurped town, to another do, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason your viceroy is like a legal official. Regal your viceroy and me, the Holy Spirit is who that is. Me should defend, but is captivated and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved if fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie, or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except or unless you ravish me." What a poem. Anyway, so that's worth going back and figuring out what it says. So any questions about today? Any comments?
What chapters are we reading to this week?
Read through chapter 4. Read through chapter 4. I gave you that last time, and you've probably already done it. But if you haven't, read through chapter 4. Other questions, comments, insight?
I have a question. So when you were talking about when you're on a team and when somebody messes up, you're supposed to take the arrows or take the responsibility. I've seen someone try to do that. How can you do that while also being honest and maintaining, integrity? Because you don't want to lie.
No. You don't have to lie.
So I guess I'm asking, how does that look like from a practical perspective when somebody messes up and you take the arrows without being insincere about it?
Okay. So let's say you're in a ministry and you've tasked someone with the job of renting a big blow-up dragon for the big festival you're having. The thing where the kids go in and jump on it, big bouncy thing. And so you've tasked somebody with that. And the day of the big festival comes, and you say to the guy, "Where's the big bouncy thing?" And he says, "Oh no, I forgot to do that." Okay, it's one of your ministry people. Now, what I would do in that situation, I would say, "Oh, George, this is not the best thing that's ever happened. Let me take care of it." And then let's say the senior pastor is I don't work for a senior pastor who is hard-nosed about stuff. He'd just go, "Oh, okay, well, we'll do something else then." That's what he would do. But what I would do is I would go to the senior pastor and I would say, "Look, we have a problem. We have a big problem. One of my volunteers was in charge of getting the bouncy toy." I wouldn't even say his name. They would already know, but I would say, "One of my volunteers is in charge of the bouncy toy, and he failed to get the bouncy toy. And I take full responsibility for it. I'm going to do what I can to get another bouncy toy, but I can't guarantee you we're going to have one here in time for the start of the festival." And then the person in charge might say, "Oh, no problem, we'll work it out," which is usually what happens. Or they might say, "That's awful. How could you allow this to happen?" Then I would say, "You know what? It's my fault because I didn't check with the guy to make sure he had the bouncy toy ordered." And that would be taking the arrows. Then I would go back to that volunteer and say, "George, don't worry about it. I took care of it. But in the future, what are we going to do so that we don't have this situation happen again? Because I can only take so much of that and still have my job." And George would say, "Look, in the future, I will send you a copy of it. And if you don't, a copy of the reservation ticket. And if you don't get it, then you know to ask me about it and we'll, okay." But I'll know from that experience that I need to stay on top of George, and sometimes he drops the ball. And my job is not to have George get in trouble for it and say, "Oh, I didn't do it, George did it." Okay, that's throwing George under the bus. But remember, George is a volunteer. He's got his full-time job. And the truth is I should have followed up and made sure he was doing it. So
what would be your response if the person says, "Oh no, it's my fault. I want to be able to make a public statement about this"? Should you still insist that you take the responsibility for it? Or?
The person can say that. I wouldn't ask them to do that. If they want to take the blame, it's not about taking the blame. Okay, this isn't about blame, it's about responsibility. And those are different things. Blame says, "I did it." Okay. Responsibility says, "I'm responsible for this not happening. Even though I wasn't responsible for ordering the toy. I was responsible for making sure the toy would be here." Right? That's different. It's different than taking the blame. It's taking responsibility. And then I would say to the pastor, "Look, I'm sorry this happened. It was my responsibility because you tasked it to me and my ministry. And I'm going to put some things in place so that we don't have something like this again." Okay. And I've had stuff like that happen. That's why I already have systems in place to prevent things like that from happening again. But We don't have to do that very often. Yeah, you don't want those things to happen very often, but they will happen. Okay? Does that sort of answer it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We are done for today. Questions, comments, fears that you don't want to bring up in class, you can always email me, and we will pick it up next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All have a good day.
You too.